Is Kell Brook cashing out with one last big payday? Or can he actually shock Terence Crawford and the world? This is After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's boxing show in association with Betfair.
Devin Haney is the WBA heavyweight champion of the world.
Float like a butterfly and sting like a bee.
The Mirror brings you After the Bell in association with Betfair.
Welcome to today's show with me, Martin Domin, joined again by George Groves and Declan Taylor. Please do rate, review and subscribe however you consume the show. This week, over the next 45 minutes or hour or so, we will look ahead to Kell Brook's probably final world title challenge against Terence Crawford in Las Vegas on Saturday. We'll reflect on Devin Haney's win over Yuriorkis Gamboa, and then finally touch on Matchroom's female-dominated card featuring 3 world title fights this weekend. Declan, first of all, I've been hearing a rumour that this new coronavirus strain from Denmark is due entirely to your collection of mink jackets.
Yeah, I can't. Well, I don't really want to comment on that, but I can't deny it. But I haven't got a mink out yet for this show. But I save it for real special occasions, like when I do the other podcast. But maybe one day we'll get one on. But yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. We'll leave that there. George, I won't ask you about lockdown because I know your feelings on that. But Kell Brook, I want for your biggest fights of your career, you basically became self-managed and looked after your own interests. And that's what Kell Brook's done for this fight. Along with these daddies, negotiated the fight with Top Rank. And we'll come on to his training in a minute. Is it specifically for Kell Brook, do you think that's a good thing? But more generally, is it a good thing that fighters maybe don't give away quite so much power to managers who are taking a bigger cut?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's obviously pluses and minuses behind handling your own affairs. I mean, in many ways, no one's going to want to do as good a job for yourself as yourself. And, loyalties can stray in terms of the people that you're working with at times. But sometimes it is easier just to not have to do the negotiating point of view, to argue, to deal with all the problems and the points. And you do need people sort of in the picture that can do that for you. Who knows what's going on with Kell Brook right now in that sort of sense of the word, because it is very liberating for a fighter to sort of take control of his own stock. And for someone like Kell Brook, where he's at in his stage of his career, it's no surprise to me that, why give away a percentage to a promoter that's not adding any value to you? Trainers, like changing trainer, that might be more of a logistical situation. Maybe they haven't seen eye to eye in terms of the amount of camp, or Kell might want to spend more time in the States, and Dominic Ingle couldn't commit to that, or maybe something else. But looking at Kell Brook, I went through his box rec earlier, and it's been a year, like nine months actually. He's boxed more recent than a lot of fighters, but he's one fight in 2 years, and it's 3.5 years since he boxed Spence, which is the last time he was in a huge fight. So he's been pro 16 years now, 34 years of age. He's going to want this challenge, and not surprised, as Dex said earlier, he's in a good place, or he sounds like he's in a good place. So part of that, I'm sure, is where he's took all the experience that he's gained over the years of being a professional for that long, involved in the big fights, the pay-per-view fights, and now he's a huge underdog away from home. Pressure's kind of off him in that respect, and he can go out there and perform. I mean, he's up against it. I don't think there'll be many out there to back him to win, but having that pressure off him probably puts him in a good state of mind. And therefore, as well, if no one thinks he's going to win, then I should be shelling out money and emotion on people who aren't necessarily going to contribute a lot to him. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of it. There was talk that, he was never going to get on Sky for this fight when it's one of the best fights of the year. It's one of the best British fighters we've had over, recent years, in with a pound for pound top 3 at least. It's a fight that everyone's going to want to watch. But Sky were more interested in a UK pay-per-view in the heavyweight scene. So probably might have felt a little bit let down by that after all these years on Sky and Matchroom, that they hadn't campaigned hard enough to get him the backing of the state. And so, he's done a deal with Top Rank and took himself off and taken care of himself. So good for him. I definitely wish him well. He's up against it, but definitely wish him well. And even if he don't win on the 14th, he can look back and say, well, I had a go and I did it myself and I learned a lot in the process.
Almost a bit of Frank Sinatra there. You followed Kell Brook's career. I think that win over Sean Porter stands the test of time. Today, a very, very good win. But then his career almost hinges on those 2 fights with Golovkin and with Spence. Not so much that he lost the fights, but in the manner, what was done to his body, essentially, in those fights. And his record since then his record is fine. He's won the fights, but opponents have been mediocre at best, I would say. How, before he goes into this fight, where does he stand in terms of our best fighters over the last decade?
It's a tough one. I think, like you say, the opponents haven't really helped him, and that wasn't down to him. But there was a lot of times where he couldn't get big fights. He spent a lot of time waiting for Amir Khan. Like you say, the Sean Porter win was really right up there in terms of the last 10 years as a performance or result away from home from any British boxer. I think, I'm not sure history will be particularly kind to him, to be honest. I don't think he'll go down as a modern day great, but that's not through any lack of talent, I don't think. I think he's had a lot of hard luck, a lot of strange things, like the stabbing straight after he won the title was obviously totally, threw his career totally off the rails, almost his life off the rails. Things like that haven't gone his way. But this is what I don't get. There's been a lot of, sneering at his decision to take this fight, and a lot of nasal gave in a bit sort of, well, he's just doing it to cash out. He just wants some money before he retires. But at the same time, it's the same people who were hammering him when he was boxing Jojo Dan and Kevin Bizier and people like that. It's like, you can't have it both ways. You can't have a go at him for having easy fights, and then when he actually fights someone good for a world title away from home, also have a go at him. I think fair play to him. Like George said, I think liberating is the word, because he's going out there for once with no pressure. Even the Errol Spence fight, when he wasn't the favourite, or at least it was 50-50 and it was his belt on the line, but it was at Bramall Lane. It was all everyone, everything he's ever wished for. And you only have to speak to Tony Bellew about fighting at Goodison, about how much that affects you, having to carry that whole thing. For once, he hasn't got that. He's gone out there. I mean, there's no fans over there. Vegas is totally different. And he's going to have a crack at, like George said, maybe the number 1 pound for pound in the world. And I'm not backing him to win. I wouldn't put money on him to win. But I think writing him off completely as a total no-hoper is a wrong thing to do. And really, when you look at Terence Crawford's record, there's an argument to say, if he fights anything approaching the best Kell Brook, it will be the best win on his record. So this is not some stupid fight. What I am a bit disappointed about is that it's totally gone under the radar, and obviously it's not on one of the major networks. It's on Premier Sport, or I don't even know the name of it, but that's disappointing. And because of that, he hasn't had the fanfare. Can you imagine the sort of fanfare we would have had about this if he was still Eddie Hearn's guy and he was still on Sky? A bona fide pound for pound great, and Kell Brook's going over to his backyard to fight him for the welterweight title. It doesn't really get much bigger than that. We haven't got that narrative, but I think those of us who sort of have any awareness of the sport know how big this is. And there's an argument to say if he goes out and wins there, it slots in as one of the great wins by a British boxer of all time.
No, it definitely does. I think just on so it is on Premier Sports, which is a subscription channel. This is the other issue. Fight TV at least was a one-off payment, which I think people are prepared to do. And I'm sure you can join Premier Sports and then unsubscribe if you like, but people don't want to do that. So it has landed on an unfortunate channel. But Eddie Hearn did make the point, BT have kind of escaped blame for this, despite the fact that Frank One has some sort of agreement with Top Rank and ESPN. So,
Yeah, but hold on a sec. But Kell Brook's a Sky man, and he has been for however long. How much time and effort have they put into him? And I get that, but I did raise my eyebrows when Eddie Hearn said that. But this is not BT's man. He's a Sky boxer. I know they've severed ties, but he should be on Sky.
But if you believe Eddie Hearn, now Eddie Hearn, of course, has a lot of sway at Sky, right? And if you believe him, Kell Brook's gone away, done this fight on his own with his dad, and then they've thought, hang on, they've almost assumed they would be on Sky. But Hearn's point is, well, no, you walked away, you did this fight on your own, don't come back to Sky, who are basically intrinsically linked with Matchroom, and then say, you'll be putting me on, right?
No, but that's my problem, is that I think Eddie Hearn's hands are clean in this, because he's the promoter, and Kell Brook went and did the deal, and it's like, cool, that's fine, he can do what he wants. But then the point is that then Eddie has, or Sky, the link with Matchroom means that it's impossible for them to take this fight on without Eddie, which is disappointing, and it's not great. But you can see why, because they've got all sorts of pay-per-view, and this would have to be a pay-per-view fight if Sky were to take it. But it's just sad, I think. And to be honest, it's sad as a fan, because we've had to, or boxing fans have had to put up with Kell Brook against Jojo Dan, against Kevin Bizier, and paid money for that and turned up for that. And then when he gets the big one, it's like, see you later, go and get Premier Sports.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. I think you mentioned, I don't think anybody would necessarily disagree with the fact that if he wins, it's up there. I just think nobody believes he will win. And a lot of that is kind of around his preparation. We talked about him negotiating the fight himself, which probably won't impact on the fight, but his training is another part of it that just raises questions. So he's no longer with Dominic Ingle, not for the first time. Basically, because Ingle couldn't commit, I think, to training in Forteventura, because he's got other fighters now who he probably sees as more long-term projects. Willie Hutchinson, Liam Williams, etc. And therefore, Kell Brook's found a trainer, Carlos Fermento, from Instagram. He makes no bones about that. And for me, it just plays into the question marks around preparation. Now, he looks in great shape. I hope he makes the weight. But for me, it just raises questions about his preparation, how that's been for a fighter like Terence Crawford. I don't know if you agree, disagree, George.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Crawford, fantastic fight, as I say. For me, definitely in the top 3 pound for pound. But in many ways, I'm like, well, Kell Brook just needs someone to nudge him in the right direction at times. So sit down, someone who he can put enough faith in that they can do their job well enough that at the end of the first round say, right, that was working well, watch out for this, because you're not going to be able to formulate, a stringent game plan that's going to be the undoing of a fighter like Crawford. And Kell Brook at his age, 34, he does what he does well. He's going to have to do that well for 12 rounds. And there'll be 1 or 2 things that he needs to look out for Crawford. He's broke him down. It might be this shot or this particular shot. And then they'll have 1 or 2 things that he believes he's going to have success with. And he just needs to be able to drill them and get them off and, sustain that throughout the fight. And then having someone in the corner who can say, right, now pull the trigger, now do this, now do that. There's lots of trainers that you get and you hear they come in and they're trying to reinvent the wheel and they're too much instructions, in between rounds, even in the build up, or they talk too much. I don't think this will be this sort of situation. I'm sure Kell Brook knows that, right, what I do really well. Let's stick to that. He's a very neat and tidy, powerful boxer. If he's made the weight right, you'll be able to sustain that, for the entirety of the fight. Well balanced, punches very neat and correct. And then when he switched on, he doesn't really give away a lot of shots, and he's going to have to be the very best version of himself, I think, to stand a chance next weekend. But that said, if he is reveling it, then maybe this is his chance to step up to the mark and, keep that concentration for 12 full rounds and put in a real good display with nothing, with that, that pressure off him where he's going in as a challenger. And a good performance is kind of enough. I'm sure as a fighter, no one really wants that. But, I remember when Sky boxing, walked away from pay-per-view, said we're not doing pay-per-view anymore after David Haye Klitschko, and I was out there for that, and it's like, okay. And then they had they rebuilt, they had a shuffle round, and they put Eddie Hearn and Matchroom took control, and they built the next wave, and Kell Brook was one of the bigger pawns in that new wave. You had Carl Froch came out of the Super Series and boxed Butte on a free-to-air, in a world title fight. Will we ever see anything like that again on a free-to-air? Definitely not. But at the time, people were more excited about Kell Brook than Carl Froch, In my opinion, that's how it felt. And then he built steadily on Sky, and everyone was excited about him. And then one of the worst bits of matchmaking in history is they put him in with a pound-for-pound star at the time, and Gennady Golovkin, who's 2 weights above him, and he breaks his eye socket. They're saying it's a no, you can't lose this fight. He was going to do is give a good account of himself, but he was an unbeaten fighter and a world champion, I think, at the time. And I think that's probably where Brook might suffer. Is just that he's just one of them fighters who had a few problems throughout his career, injuries and the 2 losses. And we might not have never seen the full potential of him, but that happens with so many fighters out there. Rarely will you see a fighter who is managed and brought along, at a perfect rate. There's always something that throws a cat in amongst the pigeons. But for me, I definitely rate him up there as one of the best technically, and one of the best. He was definitely one of the best prospects we had in British boxing, and even the shame for Brook would be that he doesn't have enough big name wins on his record, and even going away from home, the Porter win, which was close in my opinion, real close, but he got over the line. He might never get the credit that I think he probably deserves, but this is his chance to turn that totally on his head. I think he's obviously with a book, he's a rank outsider, and I think that's definitely reflective. I think he's got it all to do. I can't see him really putting a dent in Crawford, but maybe just in terms of his mindset going into this fight, he might be clearer than ever. He might be like pressure off, and that might lead to a slightly different performance. He might be really fresh. To say he hasn't really been tested. Hasn't boxed for 9 months, but has only had 1 fight in 2 years. A lot of time that's detrimental to a fighter. But for him, coming off the back of 2 horrific injuries, and say the last one against Spence 3.5 years ago, it might have just taken that amount of time to come away, rebuild, get your weight in order. He might have always been crashing the weight to make it. He's I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great fight. I think it's a great coup for Premier Sport. Yeah, Premier Sport. I think they've had it off for this fight. This could be one of the best fights of the year. Who knows?
It's definitely, I think, given the circumstances, I mean, it's a good fight anyway, but Terence Crawford could have fought a much worse opponent, Dick.
And that was a great point earlier. Depending on the Kell Brook who shows up, this could be if Crawford does win, this could be one of his best wins on his record. Might have to dig deep. It's crazy. So I remember I might have boxed on the same card when he boxed Ricky Burns on Frank Warrenbill. Maybe not. Maybe a bit later. But I know it's thinking way back then. He's now up at welterweight and a pound for pound great,
Yeah, he's suffered badly with the sort of split. He's on the wrong side of the road as it comes with welterweights, and that's been clear in the opponents that he's picked. I mean, to be honest, Amir Khan, that was a bit of the same. People were sort of shocked by that and almost, laughed at that one as well. And really, again, you can make an argument that Amir Khan is currently the best winner on his record. So he could have boxed much worse than Kell Brook. And I remember actually at the Khan fight, we bumped into Brook on the way in. We was with his dad, and he said, "Yeah, we're chatting and we're doing a deal." And I remember thinking, yeah, of course they would, because they can't box Thurman, Spence, all of that crowd. They can't do it. Manny Pacquiao's the only one that's sort of on his side of the road, and they're obviously not going to do that at the moment, or ever maybe. And it's like, well, then if you look down the list, you've got Kell Brook, who's a name. He's won in America. He's won a world title in America before. He's boxed Errol Spence in an outdoor stadium show. It's like, yeah, of course he's absolutely right for this, for Top Rank to go for. And I have no problems with the fight. And like George said, I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be one of his most competitive fights. And it totally depends on what Terence Crawford turns up, because he's used to boxing in those full arenas in Omaha. He's not having a full arena now. He's going to be in a weird bubble in Vegas, and nobody knows how any boxer is going to respond to that. And who knows, it might play into Kell Brook's hands. It might go the opposite way.
As George mentioned, Crawford is the long odds on favourite with the bookmakers, but if you have him 14-1 on, Kell Brook is 13-2. If you and Crawford also odds on to stop the fight at 3-1 on, and 9-5 to do so in the first 6 rounds. What would be listen, if you think Kell Brook does win, then fine. But if not, what is a good performance from Kell Brook?
Go on, George.
I think a points decision loss with a share of the rounds is a good performance from Brook. It might not be necessarily nip and tuck on the scorecards, but if bouts of the fight are competitive, or even if he lands a big shot and he buzzes Crawford at one point, that would be a good result for Kell Brook. Not him personally, he definitely wouldn't think that, but as a fight fan, I would see it that way. Obviously, he's 2 losses with 2 stoppage losses, but both, he wasn't KO'd. They were. So it's not like a weakness in the chin. It's they were injuries. But again, is he susceptible to injuries? So he might get stopped. If I was a better man, then. I can't see Kell Brook being the guy who would eep out for a points loss just for the risk of not going out on his sword, on his shield. You're not going to just. So he would probably edge towards, if it's not going his way, he might throw caution to the wind, looking to get a stoppage, and then might get stopped himself. I would again go, if bet of the week, Crawford to win second half of the fight, stoppage. So I'm not going to go 9-12, but I will go 6-12 on the rounds if the odds are there, because I just think that he will find a home for the big shots in the second half of the fight, and I think. The inactivity, which I said might be fresh for Kell Brook, but also this time around, I just think Crawford's just an exceptional fighter at the moment. That would be my guess.
Crawford 7-12, also 9-5 with Betfair. Derek, you said you'd spoken to Kell Brook. Do you get any sense that he feels like it's really him against the world, in the sense that nobody's backing him? A lot of people have written him off. He is going out there probably with a small team, a select team, no fans. Is that any sense of that?
Totally. I don't think he's hiding that either. I think that's exactly how he's going to be feeling. And I got this feeling it's going to bring the best out of him, because we've seen it before in history that actually when you're comfy, which obviously is making the weight was hard, but when he's in Sheffield and he's got all that pressure and he's got all those people around him and everything's on him, that can weigh heavy. But when it's the other way, and really, all of this stuff with Eddie Hearn and with Sky, and the fact that he's not on, not on a proper channel, no disrespect to Premier Sport, but that I think is going to just fire him up completely, and it will help him make the weight. Maybe that that's one way it could go. It just makes the dieting, like he's obviously struggled with that in the past. It's one of his big challenges, but he's got Greg Marriott out there doing his diet as normal. That's going to be a big thing, is if he can make the weight properly and safely, because the problem with Crawford, he's not a cruiser. He's not going to just win rounds and just cruise it. He's nasty, and particularly to the body. And if he hasn't done the weight right, if he is draining himself, it could be a rough night. But I feel like if he does go the distance and he does avoid getting stopped and getting clipped, particularly early, I don't see this being a fight that Terence Crawford runs away with. I could see it being 115, 113, something like that, in Crawford's favour, which is a great result for Kell. And who knows, because he is good, he's technically good, he's big, he punches hard, Brook. We obviously know that Crawford is a former light welterweight, so a big, fully fledged, reasonably hard punching welterweight with that timing that Kell Brook's got and that skill. He could nick a decision or at least make it close. The problem is, does he get stopped? And if he doesn't, who knows? He's not got. There's no crowd there to make this a Crawford homer necessarily. And that's what intrigues me about the fight. And, we hear a lot about boxers in their build-up say everything's perfect, everything's great, weight's fine. And obviously it's not, because they're not going to say the opposite. So we don't really know until he gets in there, or until afterwards when he tells us it was a nightmare. But yeah, that's what intrigues me. If he's bang on it and, like you say, fired up by the whole backdrop of this build-up, then it's a hard night for Terence Crawford.
As we mentioned, the fight is on Premier Sports, probably around 5 a.m. Sunday.
Do we know how much that costs, by the way?
I think it's around it's between £10 and £12 a month. So I assume you can subscribe and then cancel, so that you get them up the first month. I don't know, maybe I'm not aware that they've made it a pay-per-view, if they even can, but I think it is solely a subscription channel. But check that out. And of course, we will be back shortly afterwards to dissect and to find out who was right and who was wrong. Coming up in part 2, we'll take a look back at Devin Haney's win over Yuriorkis Gamboa in Las Vegas. So, hot on the heels of victories for Teofimo Lopez and Gervonta Davies, Devin Haney celebrated another victory at lightweight in probably boxing's hottest division. He was taken the distance, though, by Yuriorkis Gamboa, now a veteran who's fought almost everybody around about those weights. 120, 107 twice, and 118 to 109 just shows the extent of that victory. Gamboa never really looked in serious trouble, never put down as he had been done previously by Gervonta. Declan, first of all, the win was, we assumed he would win. There was never much doubt about that. Any disappointment that he didn't make some sort of statement and stop Gamboa?
Yeah, there's always a bit of a concern for me when you see cards that wide and there's no stoppage. Particularly, okay, you get totally durable people who don't get stopped, but he was stopped in his last fight. So yeah, a little bit, to be honest. We have got a few. We're in the post Floyd Mayweather era where cruising to victory, I mentioned it with Terence Crawford, sometimes becomes the best thing to do because you can and you're totally in control, and why would you bother doing anything else? He kind of did that, to be honest. But you can't take anything away from him. What is he, 21 still? And he's fighting Gamboa. It's kind of a normal, it's a reasonable and okay, acceptable sort of fight. But what we hear about him, and like he calls himself the real WBC lightweight champion and stuff like that, you expect a little bit more, I think. And I do think people switch off much more quickly than they used to. People get bored a lot. I remember Lomachenko getting absolutely hammered for his performance on the Mayweather-Pacquiao undercard because he was just like, well, he's just cruising, it's too easy for him. I think the big acid test is when he steps up and when he's in big fights, and then what does he do? And when it's more impressive actually to win by shutout. But yeah, in answer to your question, a little bit off the back of the Lopez win and certainly the Davis knockout of Roque Santa Cruz, and that they're all in that sort of vanguard of young upcoming superstars. It was the least impressive of the three by a mile.
As Dick mentioned, George, we almost, if you compare the sort of morning after, the night before reactions, you've got Gervonta, who has that knockout of the real contender against Santa Cruz, and then it's short enough that it basically goes viral. So you can cut that down into whatever short segment you need for your various social media channels. And then you've got the following week not necessarily through any fault of his own, but because he's gone the distance, it's very hard for then anybody to showcase Haney. For people who haven't stayed up to watch the fight, which I imagine will be quite a lot, I'm not saying fighters should be sort of doing everything by social media, but in this day and age, in 2020, that does count for something.
Yeah. But I mean, they definitely don't do anything for social media. If you're staying up late to watch Devin Haney, you might fall asleep. But we are in the Mayweather post-boxing world scene. I think one exceptional fighter, exceptional talent, 21 years of age, WBC world champion, whether you want to class him as the full world champion or not, he is. He was elevated to that status, not something I'm a fan of. And right now it's sort of like, I just think that for his own benefit, profile, even his future, he could just lay low a little bit for a couple of years in that, obviously keep boxing, keep busy, but don't be this sort of the hype train that, everyone was trying to make him out to be. He signed with DAZN, Eddie Hearn. Maybe it's not the same in the States. Obviously, I don't live in the States, but here, because he was going to be the poster boy for Matchroom's DAZN, there was talk that they were going to try and throw Luke Campbell under the bus and put him in with Haney for a world title, WBC or Eliminator. Obviously, Campbell ended up boxing Lomachenko, but he's not the most exciting to watch unless you just appreciate that pure skill. And if you look at who he's up against right now, it's even more so in that respect. When you look at Lopez, who's only 23, and just beat, arguably the pound for pound number one in the world. So for me, if I was him, obviously keep doing your thing, keep shouting about, but he will likely just not get forgotten about, but the sensation that people were trying to build him up to be, because you can do that when someone's 18, 19, 20, maybe even 21, but by the time he's 23 and he's had 4 world title defenses, there's going to be someone else along the lines who's just done an Instagram knockout, a highlight reel knockout, and you get forgotten about. So but a shutout performance for him. Gamboa, obviously a fantastic fighter. Just maybe a lack of discipline or a lack of something, just couldn't cut it at the top level. Gave away a lot of height and reach against Haney, and obviously a lot of age. Didn't see the full fight, but I've seen the extended highlights, and Gamboa had some success and did land some shots. It wasn't acknowledged by the commentators ringside, who were a little bit in awe of Haney, but I still feel like Haney's a bit of a project. He's going to have to make some adjustments and some improvements to compete at the very top of the lightweight division. But that said, obviously 25-0 at 21 years of age, you expect him to only get better, providing that he is nurtured correctly at this stage, where he's not the finished article by any stretch of the imagination, and he needs to be aware of that, and the people around him definitely need to be aware of that as well. Otherwise, I think he will come unstuck. The future. But 21 years of age. What a great place to be in for him.
I mean, there will be pressure, undoubtedly, for him to fight Teofimo Lopez and to clear up this WBC situation. But you would say, don't listen to anybody. Don't listen to the noise, I guess, and just do your own thing, and don't worry about what people think of email champions, super champions, etc. Yeah,
I can't see him being worried that people would not acknowledge that he's a full world champion or number one division. He'll shout about it until for as long as he needs to. And if I was him, I'd look for at least the next year or two to just be picking off more guys out of the top 10, maybe former world champions. They don't necessarily need to be big names, but even like a Lomachenko, I wouldn't be, if I'm Haney's team, I would not be looking to fight someone like Lomachenko, who has such a vast experience, even coming off the back of a loss. Is it Barbosa who beat Selby? That probably be along the lines of the opponents that I can see Haney fighting next. So guys who are good, really good fighters, but arguably not the Lopez's and of this world, not Gervonta Davis. I stay away from Gervonta Davis. You don't need that fight at 21 years of age or in the near future. Just let the scene clean up a little bit, and then and go from there.
Interesting. Deck, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm a bit surprised by the shouting for the Lopez fight, because it feels like, I don't know, and again, it is because of the day and age we live in, but the idea of any of those three fighting each other anytime soon seems totally implausible. Not that no one wants to see it, but just based on everything that goes with it. But he does seem to have this thing, and like you say about cleaning up the WBC situation, for me it's pretty clear that he's not the champion, and that Lopez is, because he beat Lomachenko. And as far as I can tell from all the noises I'm hearing, is that Lopez will move up. So sticking about for another fight at lightweight, a difficult, dangerous fight, which would be far bigger down the line, would be surprising. And I think Haney needs a bit more, like George said, just a bit more seasoning. I mean, Gamboa is not a bad opponent for that sort of fight. But when you do it as the poster boy and as the world champion and stuff, it doesn't really work. It reminds me a little bit, in a slightly different way, but when Anthony Joshua beat Joseph Parker, got hammered for that performance. When you look at it, it was a unification fight. He barely lost a round, barely got touched. It was a real clever performance. But the people who have been sold this thing that he's this monster and he just annihilates everyone, when he doesn't do that, people go, oh, well, it's not what I was expecting. So, maybe he's all hype and stuff like that. There's a little bit like that with Haney. And he turned pro at 16, so he's already been going 5 years. But 21 years old is nothing, especially with, that he went pro before he could go to the Olympics or anything like that. He had an amateur career, obviously a long one, but spent a lot of time in that Mayweather gym. So it's clear what he wants to become. It takes a lot of time to get there, and steer clear of people like Davis, Lomachenko and stuff like that. But maybe when you're on that much of a pedestal, you got no choice. Not that he turned down anyone, but maybe you just need to pump the brakes on it a little bit and just let him become as good as he can become before he starts thinking about, big fights, because he's going to be mega rich whatever happens.
Of course, within a month, we will have a WBC interim lightweight champion. I think I'm right in saying, when Luke Campbell takes on Ryan Garcia. So I assume Haney will have to fight the winner of that one.
Well, Garcia and Haney is one that's really gone. That's a long running one. They boxed as amateurs. I think they're 3-1. I think Haney won 3. Ryan Garcia won 1. So again, that little clutch of youngsters. And if I'm as far as I can tell, if you're anyone behind the scenes, you're saying keep these ones marinating for 3 or 4 years, and then they're going to be colossal. Again, the idea of Garcia and Haney boxing when they're both 21 as a professional would be a surprise. But it'd be great to see it. Maybe we're getting into a new era now where people just fight each other. But I'm skeptical. I'm cynical about that.
One interesting point as well is that if Lopez does move up, then Haney becomes franchise champion, gets elevated to franchise champion, and then the winner of Campbell Garcia becomes full WBC world champion. So the WBC might never get cleaned up. Who knows?
So that would be certainly one way to avoid the fights. But we went through all this with Mayweather Pacquiao, didn't we? I mean, it's not quite the same because they're a lot younger. But surely the idea of, for example, if let's take Garcia and Haney just because they have that rivalry, if that fight is on the card in a month or so, it's highly unlikely that the loser of that fight is going to disappear, right? So either you get such a great fight that you have the rivalry, an immediate rivalry, which grabs headlines right here, right now, and for the next 12 months keeps boxing fans excited, or the loser goes away, rebuilds, and there's plenty of time to come back.
Yeah, but we both know, well, we all know that is unlikely. And for instance, George Groves beating James DeGale back in the day, that was an anomaly. in all other rivalries of that ilk were basically kept apart for that reason. And also we got to wonder what the landscape's going to look like with DAZN, who have obviously allegedly, I don't know how to put it, but if Canelo's gone, and who knows what's happening to their model and their money and their finances, they're paying him a lot of money. Maybe he'll be a free agent at some point, and then maybe he'll go a different route. It's impossible to say. I think it's implausible that they're going to be fighting each other in the next 12 months.
I mean, I know you've probably talked about the James DeGale fight till you're blue in the face, George, but what did you feel back then when that fight was being made? Was there ever any suggestion to you, no, this is too early, let this fight wait?
No, I mean, you've been told like from a very early age that you two are going to, fight each other and it'll be worth millions, and it wasn't. So when we boxed, it wasn't. So I was like, is it too soon? And I won. So, I never had the ramifications of dealing with a loss at that stage in my career and having to rebuild. I lost, not even, it felt like a long time after, but probably 2.5 years after against Froch. And then it's only with hindsight now that I feel like I always felt the recovery came from the second loss and, the time it took me to rebuild from that. But it likely started with the first loss. There's a psychological thing to losing. You don't ever expect it as a fighter, and you'd be ignorant to it as a fighter as well. But Haney or Garcia at 21, if they box each other next year, 21, 22, and one of them lost, it might take the loser an awful long time to come back from, and it's not a physical thing as such always, that we're sticking with a couple of easier type opponents, build his profile up a little bit more as well. It's that resentment of BMP. We pushed, I remember pushing consciously and sort of maybe a little bit unconsciously for the DeGale fight, for the British title fight. I was racing to win a British title before James DeGale, because I thought that what'll happen is I'll win the British title and then he won't fight me because Frank Warren won't let him, and it will just make him look a bit stupid. Literally that's what the initial thought was. But then he boxed Paul Smith for the British title, and I was already pushing. I think I was already mandatory for the British title. So then it was set up like no one's going to back away from that situation, and it grows arms and legs for itself, and it was on.
Was it a purse bid in the end?
No, we did. I did a deal with Warren, so we was going to go purse bid. Trying to be really clever. So back then you never had to put down a deposit for a purse bid. I think literally because of our fight with DeGale, the British Boxing Board of Control said, right, no more of these, multiple purse bids. You need to whack a deposit down. Because I think Haymaker made a bid. They got Dave Caldwell to put in a bid, and a few others. So that either way we were going to win it. Mm-hmm. So I think Haymaker put in a huge purse bid, or maybe got Caldwell to do that, and then they put in a more realistic bid. If their realistic bid beat Frank Warren's bid, then we'd go ahead and promote on the realistic bid. If Warren's kind of came second, well, then we'd add it up and work out, well, maybe we'll box on Frank Warren's card, but we've pushed the price up a little bit because our initial top bids come in, and we'll withdraw that and go for the second. But either way, actually, what seemed like fantastical kinds of money at the time for a purse bid, if Haymaker had decided to go full ahead with that purse bid, promote, ticket the O2, stick it on pay-per-view, they would have made an awful lot of money. And I'm not sure what, and I think DeGale was on set purses then, and I took a purse against for Warren, and but I think Warren done well that night, I'd imagine. So good for him, because you roll the dice as a promoter, sometimes you come unstuck, but he had it off that night, I reckon, especially when the Cleverly bout sort of almost fell through. But yeah, that was that. So that's the story of a purse bid.
10-year anniversary next year. What are the chances of a reunion? Not in the ring.
Yeah, let's do it.
Get him on here.
I feel like James has gone very quiet.
It might get mooted about. I can't be bothered. I'm enjoying doing this podcast every week. You know, I used to be in the gym working hard Sunday mornings, Monday mornings, whenever we officially record this podcast to put it out. And usually I'm in the gym now, so I can't sacrifice a podcast to be in the gym. Wouldn't work for me.
We'll keep trying. We've got a few months. Maybe we'll just have him waiting and it'll just pop up.
He's going to slide in from your camera angle.
Now that would go viral. Okay, so maybe not the big fights just yet for Devin Haney. In our third and final part, we will look ahead to Matchroom's card this coming weekend, dominated by 3 female world title fights. So this coming weekend, Matchroom have another show at Wembley Arena, headlined by Katie Taylor, her defence of all her lightweight belts, but also backed up by another 2 world title fights in the women's sport. So Katie Taylor takes on Miriam Gutierrez at lightweight. Terri Harper, who of course drew with Natasha Jonas a couple of months ago, takes on Katharine Thunders at super featherweight for the WBC world title. And Rachel Ball faces late replacement Hodelina Guanini for the WBA bantamweight title. There are some fights underneath that. But Dec, we'll come to the sort of women's scene at the moment and how it's progressed. The fact that we have 3 bouts topping the bill. Katie Taylor, again, it always feels like it's one more fight and then there'll be a proper big one. Thoughts on her against Gutierrez? Yeah,
well, this is a mandatory fight, so there's always a little bit of leeway there. And it's only 3 months since she beat Pursoon in their rematch. So that was a hard night for her. And it was a big, big fight. So getting a world champion out 3 months later is a bit of it doesn't happen very often. Certainly doesn't happen with men. So, yeah, I'm happy with the card. Like, it's a treble world title bill. And, yeah, mandatory challenger for her. Miriam Gutierrez is a good fighter as well. I think she's 13-0, interim champion, worked her way up. Interesting backstory as well. She had a real bad injury in like a domestic violence attack and stuff. So, and she's one of those who's had clearly massive sort of much harder things to deal with. So actually boxing that's cool for her. I don't see her being able to cope with Taylor if Taylor's at her best, and who knows if she will be 3 months on from that fight against Pursoon. I mean, you would think that that's a pretty quick turnaround, even if they're only doing 10-2s compared to 12-3s. But yeah, that's an interesting fight for me. And like you say, if she wins, then we look ahead to what might come next. I mean, the Cecilia Breaku's fight is down the pan. That was the big one. Amanda Serrano fight seems to be totally gone. But we've got someone like Chantal Cameron and stuff. So yeah, there's still big fights out there for Taylor. And this one, as much as it sounds disrespectful, but a marking time fight and certainly a mandatory challenger out of the way. And more exposure. And it's 4 years to the month that she made her debut at the same arena, which was obviously packed that night. Won't be anyone there this time. So when you think about what Taylor's done for the sport in 4 years, and she's cleaned up the division, and it's incredible, really. And it sort of mirrors, or at least goes in line with the sort of impact she had as an amateur as well. So no problem with that opponent. Good fight. I'm really interested in the Harper Tanders fight. Tanders a good Norwegian, far older than Harper. Again, I would expect Harper to win, but that's a really good fight. And Rachel Ball, late replacement, but I think she's ended up with a harder fight than Ebony Bridges, who, what was she, 3-0? There was a bit of stick for that, for her getting a shot at a world title, but Guanini, a former world champion at Superfly, so coming up, but has that pedigree. Much smaller than Ball, though. Like, clearly, Superfly, and Ball's a big, rangy, tall boxer. So that's going to be one of those classic ones where, a bit like the Courtney fight, where she's going to try and just keep her off, and Guanini's going to have to try and get up close and look for something over the top that she can't see, and she might land it. She's a real good, neat and tidy and aggressive fighter. So for me, 3 really good, interesting fights. And yeah, the pandemic hasn't been good for a lot of people, obviously, but I tell you one thing that's benefited from it, and that's women's boxing. And yeah, when would we get 3 world title fights with men, even on a pay-per-view, let alone a free-to-air? So we should enjoy it, and we should. I think actually the tide's turning, and people love women's boxing, and they. I don't like that. Oh, let's just. Why do we have to call it women's boxing? It's the same sport, because it's clearly not. So I think it's a little bit spurious to say, but the fact that it's getting this mainstream coverage and we've got people flying the flag like Katie Taylor is great for the sport. And I think as fans, we're the ones who feel the benefit of that.
Definitely. And you mentioned Katie Taylor's quick turnaround, and it's a good point, but it also applies to Terri Harper.
Yeah. And the other, so Tanders and Guanini. No, Guanini's from Argentina. Tanders and Gutierrez, both based in Spain, which has obviously been really badly affected by the pandemic. Neither of them have boxed for a year. So you're going to get people who have got either momentum / totally knackered from boxing in August against people who have had a year out. And it's going to be interesting to see who fares better. Is it better to have a rest but no momentum, or some momentum but you're fatigued? I think that's also going to be good and interesting to see.
I mean, I know it's different for every fighter, George, but is there a general feeling as to which is better? Because all 3 ladies had tough fights. I mean, there was 1 draw and the other 2 were contested, all went the distance. Are they just going to ride that wave? And is it better to have that momentum?
Yeah, I suppose each person is different, but it's Katie Taylor to be involved in a huge fight. And then even if you just break it down, okay, right. So you want to have a rest after that fight. What is an adequate time to switch off, not just like physically for your body, but also mentally to switch off from preparing for a fight? And there's the difference between them fighters that just love to be in the gym and ticking over and just doing something, as opposed to, right, okay, this fight is set, now you're in camp. If you're talking about 12 weeks, like most fighters like, especially at championship level, like a 12-week camp. If you've boxed 12 weeks ago, then if you had a 1 week off, 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, and then that's eating into your prep time. And 9 times out of 10, I feel like it's always a brain thing. You know, it's a mental thing. You need a mental rest to get away from it, because in some ways, if you come out of a fight with no injuries, then you only want a tiny bit of time over before you're back in the gym doing something light, not too strenuous so your body's going to break down, but also where your body's not going to, go soft. You're not going to pile on weight, or you're not going to just switch off, all the muscles and everything that, you need to be firing all cylinders once you're in, the full stretch of camp. So, be a hard one. I think it all depends on the momentum going, of the last few fights that you've had. If you're used to boxing regularly and you're not feeling too fatigued from that, then that's always the best. If you go from camp to camp and you might only have a couple of weeks off or a short holiday with your family, all these things are going to be interesting in a period when there's a lot of stress out there in the world. Like, people can't do their usual thing. They might not be able to train in their usual gyms. They might not be able to fly sparring partners in, or might not be able to have a holiday with their family that they would have at the end of a fight. Maybe people get away and get out of the house for a camp that can't be done this time. And if you've got kids indoors or a young family or a partner or whatnot, who knows? But it's hard. It'll be hard to tell. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, the biggest shock is like Katie Taylor coming off that fight and then 3 months later out again. As you say, fitting into the calendar, the boxing calendar, and getting a mandatory out of the way. I doubt she'll want to be digging deep, that night, because it wasn't that long ago before she was in a mega fight.
As Deck mentioned, definitely, all 3 of these women especially have had, plus others, have had a great last few months. And we were talking earlier about, we now have, if Rachel Ball wins on Saturday night, and of course Katie Taylor and Terri Harper defend their world titles successfully, that will be 5 British and Irish female world champions. I think we have, did I say 6 or 7 male world champions, which is a remarkable turnaround, George, as you were saying, from 12 months ago. And it is important, I think, in these dark and difficult times that we highlight the positives. And going forward, it means that in 2021, let's hope, when these fighters can be introduced essentially to crowds who maybe haven't seen them before, and they can be done so as world champions and bigger names than they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's to get the headlines that women's boxing needs right now for the exposure. You know, a world title attached to it still carries its weight. The British boxing public have sort of the emphasis on titles has sort of moved on from there. You know, they're more adamant about fights. If you go through the pay-per-view calendar, they're just heavyweights at the moment with no world titles, not even in the realm of being close. You know, you got Andy Joshua with world title in a heavyweight division on Sky, and that is it. You know, but he's not the only heavyweight pay-per-view this year. So people are more interested in the fights. But at this stage, as I say, building women's boxing, having world champions will open a door for a lot more of the casual exposure that you can get, you know, whether it means crossover into other medias where you might be on a cooking show or a chat show or, you know, morning breakfast show or something like that. So it's great for women's boxing. They are definitely flying at this stage, and no doubt because of the investment and what will certainly be the demand from British sports fans in general who appreciate, you know, seeing the fights. So it's great. It's great for them. It's up to the men to get themselves back in order and try and regain a sizable lead over the females out there, because soon they will be overtaken. I think it wasn't that long ago that they were well into double digits in terms of world champions. But again, without a moan, you know, the more you got, the more spoiled for choice you are, and therefore that led to people wanting to just see the big fights, the big names in big fights, competitive, meaningful fights. So, and we are getting that in women's boxing as well. So, as long as that stays put, it's all good.
Absolutely. So when we come back next week, we could have 2 new world champions. We could have no new world champions, but 2 continuing world champions. Certainly all to play for this coming weekend, and therefore plenty to talk about when we join you in a week's time. As I said, please do rate, subscribe, and review our show, and join us again next week.